Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today with Tim and Professor Zhou. For this panel, Forging Pathways Towards Fossil Fuel Freedom, we will be discussing one of the most pressing challenges of our time, transitioning from a growth-dependent growth to a sustainable future for all. As we've witnessed, Asia has experienced tremendous economic growth over the past many decades, but this has come at a cost of rapid rise in GHG emissions. This is driven by energy consumption from coal and other fossil fuels. And Asia's share of the global carbon emissions has surged to 52%, yet it has proven difficult to wean off of fossil fuel, just given the low costs and other practical considerations. As we embark on this journey towards fossil fuel freedom, I think it's very important to consider how can Asia sustain its growth trajectory while urgently reversing this emissions trend. We don't have much time today. We have about 17 minutes left to dive right into the questions. So I'll start with Professor Zhou on China. So China has achieved very stellar growth, but currently it's the largest emitter of GHG globally. At the same time, China has emerged and taken steps to become a leader in solar and wind renewable energy, as well as EV. So could you give the audience an overview of the plan of China for energy transition, and how fast do you think that China can reduce its reliance on fossil fuels?
Thank you for the question. In fact, that's a fact, and we can start from the NDC made by China in 2016. And after almost 8 years, we have seen, most of the indicators, China had been on track for achieving its NDC target, and especially for renewable development. I should say nobody expected such a fast development for renewable, and by the end of 2023, the incremental capacity of solar and wind power reached to almost 300 gigawatts, and I would assume China will continue to maintain this kind of pace for further development, and these can serve as a major driver for China to transit away from fossil fuel. Although it's only for the moment in the early stage, but the trend becomes more and more clear. With larger and larger share of renewable, we will be more and more confident to phase out coal, oil and gas in the coming decades. But certainly we also see some new emerging challenges, that the linkage between greenhouse gas emission and the growth. So in the past years, we have felt a very heavy pressure for growth rate at a higher level, but it seems, for the first quarter of this year data, we see for the moment the trend is good, but let's see for the rest of the year what about the economic growth. If it can go on track, I would say we can manage the linkage between the emission and the growth. But anyway, I would say investment in renewable, in smart grid, might serve as a new driver, increasing driver of the growth.
Great. Tim, having heard the story of China, are there any parallels or differences that you would draw for Southeast Asia?
Thanks very much, Connie, and it's great to be up here with Professor Zhou at this wonderful event. I think the first thing to say is that things are moving, and things are moving quite rapidly. Largely thanks to what's been happening in China. If we look at the last 5 years, the growth in clean energy has outpaced growth in fossil fuels by 2 to 1. And China has been deploying at an enormous rate, and that has helped to those then to determine that global picture. But when I look at the situation in Southeast Asia, I certainly see the growth story is similar, but the deployment story is not yet similar. And I think what you can learn from China's experience is the need for very integrated thinking about not just deployment, but also value chains, about the way to build in employment, local value, using some of the critical minerals and other manufacturing prowess that Southeast Asia has. Because in common with China, Southeast Asia does have long-term net zero ambitions, but we need to see much faster movement in that direction in order to deliver on them.
Yeah. Tim, one of the challenges, I think, in this part of the world is that the coal plants are actually quite young, average around 12 to 15 years. Do you see that as a key impediment to transitioning?
Yes, I think it is. This is for a number of reasons. I mean, one is that there is a large amount of unrecovered capital in those young plants. In our view, if you look at the plants around the world, there's over $1 trillion of unrecovered capital in young coal plants, and that's predominantly in Asia. And it also means that, when you have those plants, often with quite restrictive PPAs underpinning their operation, it doesn't allow for much room for renewables to grow, even if the economics are very compelling. So I think there is a need for creative thinking here. There's need for creative financing approaches in order to get that balance right and to maintain electricity security, affordability, while offering the potential to bring lower cost, cheap, clean energy into the system.
Yep. Now that we've heard a little bit about the transition plans in China as well as Southeast Asia, I wanted to zoom into two key aspects of energy transition. One being emerging technologies, and the other being financing, as Tim, you just mentioned. But maybe starting with emerging technologies, Professor, do we have the requisite cost-competitive, low-cost emerging technologies today that will allow us to transition? And in your opinion, what are the most crucial technologies that will allow us to accelerate this transition?
Yeah, in the past 1 or 2 decades, we have seen very dramatically fast growth of the new technology. So as you said, the emerging technology. I would highlight 2 types of technology. One is, decarbonization of the power, especially in the range of renewable. So in the past decade, we have seen almost 90% of the cost reduction of the solar, for example, and very similar to wind power, to other, biomass, etc., etc. And another type is the technology for efficiency, energy efficiency, covering almost all the major economic sectors, including iron, steel, cement, the chemical, and the petrochemical, and especially together with the support of digitalization or AI technology. And we have seen the learning curve of the technology. The cost declined very fast, and they are more and more cost effective. But certainly, we have Energy Foundation China, we have had some study on the available technology, in the view to reach carbon neutrality in the coming 3 or 4 decades. Our funding is, for the moment, only 50% of technology penetration are available and feasible in economic perspective. And we have another 50% of penetration, including, for example, CCUS technology. For the moment, they have not been commercialized. So that means for the moment, in the coming 5 or 10 years, on one hand, we should accelerate the application of the available technology. But on the other hand, we should also accelerate R&D. For those technology, they need 1 or 2 decades for R&D and then for commercialization.
Great, thank you. And on financing, Tim, transition to a low carbon economy will require a lot of investments in infrastructure, technology, yet we're facing $1 trillion plus gap in financing in this part of the world. In your view, what do you think are the key barriers to climate financing, and what more could we be doing to bridge that gap?
So at the International Energy Agency, we try and track capital flows into the energy sector. And 5 years ago, there was roughly $2 trillion going each year into new energy projects, both on the supply side, but also on the demand side in energy efficiency. And it was split roughly 50-50. So 1 trillion going to fossil fuel supply and 1 trillion going to clean energy. The situation now is quite different. Our last analysis suggests that we still have around $1 trillion each year going into fossil fuels, but we now have 1.8 trillion going into clean energy. Now, the problem with that is that pretty much all of that increase has come from China and from advanced economies. There haven't been that surge in capital spending in other parts of the world. And one of the big obstacles there is an elevated cost of capital, which is exacerbated also by relatively high borrowing costs at the moment, because we're dealing with relatively capital-intensive technologies. And so we've done survey work to understand why is that elevated cost of capital there. And a lot of it has to do with a conversation around real and perceived risks associated with those investments. Some of them are countrywide, sovereign risks, foreign exchange, and so on, but some of them are specific to the energy sector. So if we talk about new renewable generation projects, it might be uncertainties over land. Often it's uncertainties over access to transmission capacity. Often it's issues around the creditworthiness or solvency of the off-takers for that renewable power. So those kinds of things push up the cost of capital, make it more difficult to get those clean energy projects moving. And it's absolutely essential that we work with policymakers, but also with international financial institutions to provide the necessary technical and sometimes financial support to bring down, to address those risks and bring more capital into the clean energy sector.
Yeah, so one of the more popular recent initiatives surround blended finance to address exactly that question around cost of capital. Do you see that as a promising potential solution?
I think in general we need to be thinking creatively about new models of collaboration and partnership between the public and private sectors. And that's certainly a feature of the conversation here in Southeast Asia. Last Friday, we had the great pleasure to welcome to the International Energy Agency in Paris the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lawrence Wong. And one of the topics was precisely this, blended finance, the new FAST-P initiative to try and bring that mix of private and public capital in to accelerate, to improve the chances of those projects being bankable and to get some emerging technologies into the system more quickly.
Yep. I think it would be remiss of us not to mention that this transition could have very profound social as well as economic implications for local communities and the workers. So how do we ensure a just transition, for the people that are affected by this? Maybe, Professor, if you could take this.
But certainly this is a very broad issue, but I would like to focus on job opportunity. If you want to ensure the transition to be fair, to be just, I think job opportunity is the key. And if we can ensure to address structural unemployment issue in labor market. I mean, on one hand, some high carbon sectors, they may lead to some losing job opportunities, but in the meanwhile, we also see a lot of job opportunity in the emerging sectors, including new energy sectors and tourism, service, AI, digitalization. So this is a matter of restructuring. And then I think the government can have something to do for public policy to create some, for example, training system or information sharing system for targeted group of laborers, and to ensure a smooth shift from the traditional sector to new sectors. So we have a large room to ensure, keep some balancing, shifting. But in the meanwhile, I believe planning can be another hook to list the damage or the loss from this kind of structural change.
Great. Fortunately, we're running short of time, so I'll have one last question. Maybe if you can leave us with a thing that you're most optimistic about in terms of our transition away from fossil fuel. Tim?
I'm optimistic because we have many of the solutions that we need. And for where we don't have the solutions, what I'm also optimistic about is some of the things that I see at this event. Southeast Asia, very dynamic, youthful, full of ideas about bringing technologies into the system, finding ways to bring down those emissions. So that's what keeps me optimistic.
Professor, what are you most optimistic about?
I think now we are faced with, certainly on one hand, the big challenges, but on the other hand, big opportunity. So that's innovation of the development pathway. So especially based on the transition from the very beginning, for our infrastructure, like our grid system, our power system, our transport system, our vehicle. So you need to repeat the lesson learned from Europe, America, China, and we can start from totally new paradigm and a totally new system.
Great. I think we're just out of time. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.